What is Red S and why, as a postpartum mom, should you actually care? Red S is relative energy deficiency in sport, and it's important to know the signs and symptoms, especially as a postpartum mom who you're trying to lose the baby weight, back to training again. You're also a milk machine and you're not getting any rest. So our guest today, Tina MUIR, is a former professional runner. She was a professional marathoner for Great Britain, and she's going to share her story with Red S, but then also share her information and how she's trying to spread the word on letting not only women, but postpartum women understand what Red S is and how we can get better information out to women so we don't put our bodies at risk. So if you are interested in how to make sure that you're fueling correctly, make sure that you're getting your training right, and making sure you're not setting yourself up for injury, you're not going to want to miss this episode. Let's start the show. All right, so we've talked about Red S before, but I sort of fell down the rabbit hole with Tina MUIR's YouTube series, just educating on how much we need to pay attention to Red S. And I have a feeling there is far more Red S going on in postpartum than any of us realize. So I welcome Tina MUIR to the Active Mom Postpartum Podcast. Tina, thanks so much for being on the show.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So tell us a little bit about why are you so excited about sharing info about Red S? Why is this so important to you?
Yeah, it's funny you use the term excited because I think going through this process, I realized that there was actually a lot of trauma there. And I thought I was excited because this is something I'd always thought about doing. But going into it, it was kind of like you hear people saying about when they write a book, how it like exposed things and they needed to go into therapy or they really opened up some things that they'd kind of repressed. And it was very much the case for me. So while I will say I started off passionate and excited about this, by the end, it was very much a healing and reflective and growth period for me in that I had Red S. Well, at the time, it was just kind of amenorrhea of not having a period was all that I knew of. For 9 years, or maybe 11 if you want to count. I had one period in between that was forced by just some very strong hormones. But I went through all these years as a collegiate athlete, as a professional athlete, of not having a period. That was all I knew of it at the time. But having since that time, I've learned a lot more about the symptoms beyond just having a period, and it affects more than just fast elite runners. It affects all genders. It affects all speeds, all mileages of running or exercise. It affects people of every size, every shape. And so coming into that information, I also came into the fact that it's not just about not having a period. There's also all these other symptoms that I had been having all along that made me feel a little bit crazy and feeling even more frustrated with my body. And so I wanted to make this because this is what I wish I had when I was going through that period, when I felt so alone and so broken. And I've always had a pretty good relationship with my body in terms of I'm a very intuitive person and I listen to my body. But I also hated it because I couldn't understand what was wrong with it. And now I know it wasn't anything wrong with it. It was just like that was something I wasn't addressing, and all these other little things were going wrong because of it. It was all connected, which now is Red S.
Wow. How does it feel to see more people talking about it and almost reflecting back the experience that you had? I just finished Lauren Fleshman's Good for a Girl. Obviously, she was very open about that as well. Like looking back on that, are you like, wow, this was such a thing. It's still such a thing. How is this still happening?
Yeah, Lauren was a really hard hitting for me. I mean, I said to her, I cannot, of all the things you shared in that book, which I absolutely loved, and I was really fortunate to have an advanced copy, so I, had time to process it before it came out. I could not believe Lauren Fleshman, of all people, went through that. Like, to me, she seemed like the one person that I was like, absolutely not. Because she just seemed so above all that. above making those mistakes, above, like so confident in who she was that she would never fall into those traps. So that was pretty eye-opening to see that she had also struggled with the way that she looked and restricted and suffered the consequences of it. And yeah, so it is good to see, but there's also the unfortunate side of knowing so much about this and having such a passion for this, is that I see it all around, and I can look at these women, especially, but some men as well, and say, yep, I know you're working through that.
Yeah.
But know that there's nothing I can do to get them to get to the place where they're prepared to either admit it or get help. They just have to figure it out on their own. So while I'm glad that the conversations are happening, they're almost always after, unless someone like Ali Ostrander, Amelia Boone, I really admire both those women for speaking out during.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's quite hard to see, knowing that they know I know how they feel, and
Right.
yet I can't do anything to change it. And even Ali Ostrander, I talked to her recently, and she said, all those years I was following you and paying attention to you, and all those years I was watching her being like, I should say something, but I can't. I should say something, but I can't. And so it's just like a hard place to be in as an empathetic person, that I want to like help them, but I can't.
Yeah. I think, again, to your point, like it was and continues to be so dominant in the running community, high school, collegiate, professional. If we shift gears a little bit and look at postpartum athletes, we're getting a lot more moms that are showing up and performing and doing well. Even if we kind of start looking at the recreational postpartum athlete, what are you seeing? Because I have moms that have no idea what I'm talking about. You say, oh, well, female athlete triad or something like that. And they're like, oh, okay, but I'm not an athlete. I just run community races. Or why would relative energy deficiency in sport, when I don't consider myself an athlete? Like, unpack that a little bit.
Yeah, well, and one more thing I want to add to that is that women who are postpartum, it's very easy to be like, well, I had a baby, so I must be fine. You know, you're like, well, I have my period, or maybe it's not I have my period. Oh, my period's all messed up because I just had a baby. But
right. Or I'm breastfeeding,
yes.
or oh, it just hasn't come back yet.
Yes. And so it's you've got that layer of it, that kind of that not superiority. And I very much was the same. I think with my first daughter, it took like 15 months to come back. I don't know, looking back, whether that was Red S or not. I'm not sure. But with my second, it came back after 6 months, and that's a pretty drastic difference. So and my sister, hers came back with both her kids after like 2 months. So I know, at least from my one other sibling, maybe it should have come back. So I get it. Like, it's very easy to be like, well, it just hasn't normalized, stabilized. But yeah, I mean, especially when you add in the breastfeeding, the amount of calories you burn. I remember, and you'll get this, and many people listening. I remember saying to my mum that I was having a hard time eating enough. And it wasn't a not want to eat. It was a literal, I don't have the energy to eat. And she'd be like, well, why don't you eat some like carrots and hummus? And I would say, Mum, chewing carrots just seems
it's
like
so much
too
effort.
much work. I can't be bothered. It's not worth the 10 calories I'm going to get from it. I'd rather just like get a spoonful of peanut butter.
Oh my gosh, that's so good.
And it's so like, I remember and feeling that way. And the same thing with, I would be like, you know what? I just wish I could make a smoothie that was 2,000 calories. I'd sit there and I'd like drink it down at the beginning of the day. And then at least I could go through like the morning and part into the afternoon without needing anything. I wish I could do that. So it is so, you're already taking care of other people. You're trying to do other things. You've got whatever else is going on in your life, and preparing food. I mean, my youngest is 2.5, and I still sometimes open the fridge and I'm like, oh, I should make it like a salad or something. And I'm like, oh, I just can't be bothered. And so then I shut the door, and then 10 minutes later I come back and I just grab a quick thing because I'm like, I just can't. So it is a challenge. But I think you're right that postpartum, it's very easy to miss because we can so easily blame hormones. We can blame busyness, we can say, I'm trying to do too many things at once. Oh, stress is a contributor, right? So it must be that. And yeah, so I would imagine there's quite a lot of that going on, especially those women who are determined to get back to some kind of goal.
Yes.
That it is hard to get enough calories. Like, it really is, especially if you're marathon training. I mean, that's that you got to be continuously eating at that point.
Yeah. No, you're totally 100%. Well, and then you've got sleep deficit. And I see a lot of moms, a couple things with their eating, either during pregnancy, they say they let themselves go, but they were a little bit looser with, but they feel the need to go restrictive. And if you're around my generation or a little bit less, all you know of eating is restrictive eating to lose weight. So you're like, okay, I've never lost baby weight before. This doesn't feel right. I'm going to go restrictive. Oh, and by the way, I'm going to get my body back and do this 10K or 10 miler and overtrain if you're lucky enough to have your baby sleep, all that other good stuff. Like, I just feel like it's the perfect storm to set yourself up for this. Like, what for you, like what kind of thinking back in your first pregnancy and postpartum, like, how did you even know how to navigate? I mean, you're a pro runner, for crying out loud. Like, how do and we know, you and I know that there, not a lot of resources, but like, how did you figure out how to navigate training through those periods of time the first time around, and what was different the second time around for you?
Yeah, I think the first time around, I had done some of the unpacking of my behaviors, my relationship to food, in terms of I recognized that thoughts like, oh, it's 2 p.m., I'm hungry again. Oh, but it's 4 hours to dinner. Oh, I'll just eat an apple and that'll be good. And then, 4 p.m., I'm still hungry. Of course I am. Right. So I'm just going to eat a few carrots. Like, recognizing that things like that, that's not healthy. However, I will say I would see pictures of myself. I have one in particular that keeps in my mind of like 6-8 weeks postpartum, something, maybe even more than that, 3-4 months, I don't know. And seeing a picture that my husband took and my belly hanging over my pants and being like, oh, what is that? Like, I got to get rid of that. I got to get rid of it. And having that temptation of, oh, well, maybe if I cut back, I've got this. And this is, this is where I'll be honest, when people maybe speak to things people are thinking, but not quite said out loud. I'd see things like, I'd say, all right, well, I got some things going for me here. I'm breastfeeding and I'm running. And I've got a lot going on, so I can do this pretty easy. This is going to be quick.
Right.
And then I can get myself to a healthy mental place. But it just doesn't work that way. And yeah, you're the person who's going to be able to speak to the effect it would have on like breast milk or, your body's functioning. But in terms of your running and, goals, you're also not going to be able to get to where you want to go there because you're just not giving it what it needs. And that's, we do see so many people, women who are training for things with pelvic, sacral, what's the other one? Pelvic, sacral, and femoral stress fractures, which is in terms of Red S, that's like red flag 101. And so, but I do think, and it kind of disappoints me that when pro runners have those injuries returning from training, is kind of often pinned on, oh, I just went a bit too hard, and it's kind of like brushed under the rug, like, oh, it's just kind of happened. Whereas so that leads other women to look at those elite runners and be like, well, they did it in 6 months, they got their body back, they were able to do this, and yeah, they had an unlucky injury, but then so but I think a lot of it is, it's not an unlucky injury, and it's just we are forced into believing that that's the way back. And Cara Goucher has talked about how she regrets doing what she did to her body postpartum. But she's the only person I've really heard say that rushing back was not good for her mentally and emotionally. And, the things she missed out on by not even mentally being there because she was so exhausted.
Right. Right.
yeah, we've got a lot of work to do as a society to not rush women. I mean, I get constant emails and messages from women saying, I'm 6 months postpartum, I've got a race I want to do in 2 months. It's not coming together. What should I do? And it's one thing. It's easy for me to say, like, I promise you, like, it's not worth rushing back. You will get back. But again, we can't force other people. It's the saying, you can lead a horse to water, you can't make it drink. So yeah, I'm trying to change the conversation, but there's still so much focus on performance. And women feel so lost from having, an independent life. Maybe they did their training, they had everything was about them, and now it's all about taking care of this little person, and they just want something for themselves, something to prove that they're still a person underneath. So I totally get it. And sorry, I've got way off topic compared to
but it's good, because I think there's so many things popping into my head right now. I mean, my kids are 9 and 12 currently, and I always feel bad when people are like, oh, well, I didn't, my oldest is 5, I didn't know what to do. I'm like, there wasn't anything. I mean, and that's where I kind of have to go through these processes myself, because this is my literal actual job. It's been my job for practically 25 years. I didn't know any better. There were a lot of things where I was like, hey, I should be able to do X, Y, and Z. I couldn't even run past 19 weeks with my oldest because I literally could not take a step. And then you kind of question, you're like, okay, well, how am I to tell somebody else what to do when I can't do this, right? And then there's this ego part of me where I'm like, oh, well, now I could probably do it because I know so much more, but like woulda, coulda, shoulda, right? But there's still the same, even though we have more information now, even though more people are being more active, being more intentional about how they fuel, how they exercise, there's still that comparison, there's still that expectation of, well, I should be here and I am not, or that person is and I am not. And I don't know how, and I almost, it's that hard thing. And you can probably feel this a little bit now that your kids are getting a little bit older. Like, you don't necessarily relate to that postpartum immediate as much, but you're like, if I could just take what's in my brain now and put it into yours for just like a hot second, you would get it. But I don't know how to tell you this otherwise without, seeming very condescending, or like, just trust me, this is, slow is better, slow is fast.
Yes. It definitely is difficult because you're right. I do struggle sometimes. It's the same with, I also get a lot of high school athletes who email me and they say like, I've got this race this weekend and my coach says that it has to be this. And if I don't do this, then I'm not going to get my scholarship. And I'm like, calm down. Let's take a breath. Like, I promise you, this race alone is not going to determine whether you get a scholarship or not. Like, but it feels the same way postpartum. And like, you can say to someone like you or I can say like, it'll come back. I mean, I think I've lost some credibility because people are like, you don't want to come back, so what are you talking about? Because I'm quite enjoying just like taking it, like just
good
having
for you. Find the
but,
joy.
Yeah, exactly. I did enough years of struggling my way through. But it is so difficult, and in some ways I think it is made harder by so two things. One, with my second, I remember one of my neighbors was training for a 5K or a mile race or something. So 3 to 4 months postpartum, I was down the track with her, running her pace. Like, I wasn't fit enough to run faster. I ran her pace, which was great for me. It was good. Did some track workouts. It was good. And then I ran a 5K just randomly, just one day by myself. And I ran pretty fast, like definitely minutes slower than my best, but quite fast. I was very happy with it. And I'm not going to say the time because it always just makes it worse.
Comparison.
Yeah. But I remember afterwards people being like, oh, how did you do that? How can I do that? And I was like, please, please, please don't compare yourself to me. Like, my body has got like 15 years of training. So I could probably not run for 6 months and still
pull it off.
Yeah. So please, but that's part of the problem. And I think especially now we're seeing some women postpartum who are doing things crazy quick. Like
Yes.
getting back into it so fast that it's making, yes, it's great that we're pushing the boundaries in terms of like what pregnancy, does it mean you sit there and hold your baby for 6 months and don't move because that's all you are as a milk machine? No.
Right.
But I do get fearful that by seeing these elite examples, other people think, well, I can be the exception too. I can maybe if they get back to running after 10 days, then maybe I won't do 10 days, but maybe I can get back after 12, 14 days.
Yeah.
And it stops us, once again, just like GPS watches, it stops us listening to what we need because we're just looking at what others do. And that, again, is the damage of like social media, in that you're only seeing one side of the story, not listening to you.
Totally. And I get that people want to get faster sooner and get back and find that identity. Like I totally get that. I think what gets missed in the postpartum conversation is still it's still recovery. You cannot speed up tissue healing timeframes. Like it is what it is. You cannot make that faster. You cannot like if you're trying to rebuild foundational muscles and things that have gotten weaker through pregnancy, like you can't just snap your fingers and all of a sudden have that foundation back. Like it's putting in that initial foundational work, but also in the context of, yes, you're fueling for your workouts, but you're also fueling this little one. And if you overdo on the protein too early, guess what? They're going to have GI issues, and no one loves bloody stool and mucousy stool. And I did that with my oldest. Like for the first time he had mucousy stool, I was like, okay, I think I overdid it on the Greek yogurt or something like that. And it's like, there's nothing worse than like your poor little brand newborn baby with bloody mucousy stool because his poor little GI system can't handle the conversion of protein. I was like,
I've always been terrible at protein, so I definitely didn't know that.
Me too. But it's just, no, but I had a client I was working with one time. And I think she had a 3-month-old and she was trying to kick up her nutrition and really had skyrocketed abruptly her protein. And then all of a sudden her 3-month-old was having GI issues. And I was like, that is related because by 3 months, the system should be good. But you have to watch. Like sometimes you can use the baby as a little barometer of like, whoa, you're kind of overdoing. And that's where I think, again, having somebody you can talk to or work, like I didn't have enough brain cells at that time. I still don't to meal plan. That's the worst part of my day is to go home and pick out what's for dinner. Or
absolutely.
I still do the look in the fridge and I'm like, But if you put that stuff there, that's, good choices and you can grab it quickly, I think it does make it a little bit easier. But
unless it's carrots.
Right.
Or celery. Right, not dealing with that.
Just I'm gonna stick your face in the hummus.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. So second time around with your pregnancy and postpartum with your 2-year-old, what did you do differently, if anything?
Yeah. So I when you were talking there, that was making me think of another point, which ties into this in that, again, with looking at other people, we are forgetting what kind of pregnancy and birth they had. With both of mine, I had about as quote unquote easy as you could have. I didn't have any tearing with either. I didn't have any complications. My second one even came out on call. So like she was just
nice,
totally like smooth out. Like, so I had a very easy, I suppose, recovery because that birth was easy. I didn't have any complications. I went to see a pelvic floor therapist both times. And the second time was even quicker, getting cleared than the first time with the pelvic floor therapist. And so, but I think the biggest difference was for me with my first, even though I told myself I had let go of my elite past, and I still kind of wanted to have some kind of comeback race. And for me, I selected, like, she was 12 months old. So I felt like that was soon enough. And I didn't run great. I still didn't feel like myself.
Yeah.
But I did the best that I could. And it was the Walt Disney World Marathon. So half marathon.
It's fun, right?
So you can't really, I did that intentionally because even if it was, and I wore a tutu, like if if I was going to do a race, I wanted to make it on my terms, and I'm glad I did. But with my second, I didn't have any intentions. I think I did a trail marathon at like 8 or 9 months postpartum, but it was just for fun. It wasn't like I got to do this. I just wanted to experience a trail race. And so, and like I said, I was doing track workouts, but I was very much just doing what felt right in the moment. So when my neighbor was doing these track workouts, it worked out just well because I could run with her, which was me holding back a little bit, but still getting some hard stuff in. I could also go to the trails when I wanted to, which was something I was really enjoying, having always wanted to go to the trails, but been too scared because of the typical rolling my ankle fear. And so I was just following what felt right. And that really allowed my body to not get anywhere close to where I was before, but be okay with that and just to be having fun with it. And that's, for me, kind of followed on. I still haven't really I've been doing a lot of guiding with visually impaired runners, which is not running my hardest, but I love it.
That's really cool.
Yeah,
that's really cool.
I definitely encourage everyone to do that. And, maybe that's a good thing to do postpartum because you're still racing. You're just doing it for someone else. But I've just been, this whole time, Chloe's over 2.5 now, I've just been following what feels right. And that felt so much better that I trusted my body. And I didn't have any of the issues. Like with my first, I had a few times where I strained my glute and I would have hip pain and I would have to walk home from workouts. And I just didn't have any of that with my second. And I think it was because I was finally just listening to what I wanted in my heart, but also what my body needed in the moment.
I hear that pattern a lot. I'm lucky enough that for a lot of moms, I get to work with them through a couple of pregnancies. And I have yet to work with a mom probably in 25 years that the second or third, however many times around, was harder. It's all, and I've tried to figure out why that's the case. I joke around that, the first time you're just trying to figure out how to be a mom and be a parent. And I still, I remember the day they sent us home and we literally put my son down in his room and my husband and I stared at each other. We're like, okay, now what? We had no idea. Your whole world is I feel like that first time your whole world is so altered that you don't have to go through that, subsequent times. But what do you think? Do you think, if you had a do-over, do you think you could have been able to kind of let that first time go a little bit? Or was that something that you kind of had to just learn by doing?
Well, one thing before I get to that, it's funny how I remember being early with my first in the early days and people saying to me oh, when you have your second, third, whatever, you won't care about this stuff, dropping something on the floor, and they're like, I'm just going to go wash this quick. And then getting to the point with my second, or a month ago, my 5-year-old dropped a cake pop on the floor. She'd taken one bite and she dropped it on the floor. And I was like, so I picked it up and I just put the whole thing in my mouth,
yep.
And then gave it to, I would, you would never have done
that. You wouldn't do that the first time. That's definitely mature.
Yeah, I mean, she was my first child, but I'd had years. But yeah, anyway. So it's funny you say that because I remember feeling that. And now when I'm around friends who are in the early stages, I'm like, just wait, you'll stop doing that stuff. But so to that point, I in general am not someone who would ever change anything. I think everything about my journey was the way it was meant to be. But for that reason, I don't think I would have learned, even if I had that knowledge. I think that led to some moments, that led to some things that I would have shared, some connections I would have made that helped other people's lives because of those mistakes I made, because of the things that I did. And so, yeah, I wouldn't change anything. I do think maybe there's something you just got to go through it. And I also think it makes it glaringly obvious the fact that we aren't a community anymore. Babies, it was never meant to be two people walk into a house with a baby and then say, okay, what do we do now?
Yeah.
It was meant to be like the elders in your family would help you and show you what to do, and
That's a
it would
great
be a
point.
group effort. So I think more than anything, the reason it's so jarring for us the first time is because human beings are not meant to be this way.
Yeah.
It was never meant to be.
That's a lovely point. So to that end, how do we, as experienced moms, how do we now go to these women who are considering pregnancy, who are pregnant, who are in early postpartum? How do we impart to them this wisdom of, you're overtraining, you're underfueling, you need to back off. Hey, that SI pain that you're having that you're just blaming on pregnancy, we might want to get that checked out to rule out a fracture. How do we kind of recreate that community and help this next generation of moms?
I mean, you're kind of doing that with this. That is exactly what this is. You're giving people different perspectives, and maybe my words might not sink into someone, but another guest last week did. The guest coming next week did. So giving those different perspectives and things that speak to us. We've all heard someone on a podcast, on a TV show, on a clip that we're like, yes, that's exactly how I feel. So by doing that, that helps. And then I think we all have some role to play in our general lives. We all are going to have some friends or people who are in those early stages, and going beyond the obvious of like making them a meal. That's kind of the Band-Aid, right? Is like the, take them to dinner, which is nice and helpful. But it's also kind of the like, here you go, everything is great, I made you a dinner. Whereas I actually tend to, reach out to those friends around 6 to 8 weeks, and
later.
speak to the fact of like, I always say to people like, oh, the wheels tend to fall off 6 to 8 weeks in. And at first people always look at me and say, why would you say that? Like, I'm in the 3-week point, like,
because it's true.
And I'm like, it is hard, but like right now everyone is checking in on you.
Yeah.
In a month's time, everyone's going to have forgotten that you had a baby, and they're just assuming you've got this down. And then you're left feeling lonely and maybe getting some pains in your run, and you're like, well, I can't take my running. That's the one thing I have.
Right.
And you start ignoring things because you're just surviving, and like the novelty's worn off. People have stopped helping. So I think for me, my role is kind of speaking to truth. I've also spoken to friends about like anger. Like anger in women is very much like a taboo topic. But I had a few instances where I just felt so angry at my daughter, not for any reason than her being a baby. That's obviously my own triggers, but I having to put her down and walk out the room and be like, I could like punch a wall right now. Like, I'm so mad, even though it's not her fault. And so just having to like leave her there crying, and the guilt of knowing I had left her crying, but also I needed to do that for myself.
Yeah.
So speaking to those uncomfortable things, that's what I think part of my role is, and showing women that, those like angry thoughts are okay. It's okay if around 6 to, I've sent so many messages to people around that time, and they've said, oh, thank you so much. I was feeling like totally alone. Their husband, their spouse, their partner has gone back to work.
Yep.
They're now on their own for hours on end. And I remember being that way of like it being 12 p.m. and looking at the clock and being like, all right, 6 more hours. I'll be home in 6 more hours. And, so I think a lot of it is, normalizing the things that we feel and being okay to talk about it with the friends we have, even if, like I am, sometimes you kind of become the like bad news person. At least when that thought comes through to them, they're like, oh, this is what she talked about. Oh, that's okay. She went through this too. And especially I think for someone like me who kind of lives on the internet, like I've had people say like, oh, you look like you have it all together, but knowing ahead of time, says she who posted a video of herself crying a few months ago. I definitely do not.
I'm glad we didn't have Facebook and Instagram and all that stuff. Like I literally just had, I think it was like Real Housewives of New York City. My husband like jerry-rigged a DVR that I could watch at 2 a.m. That's what I had.
Yeah. But I mean, that probably didn't help you though, right? Like watching that,
No,
seeing these
no.
perfect women.
No, 100%. And there wasn't
Mm,
like a lot of moms
mm,
with, sharing their stories like it is now. I mean, like the reality TV thing had just been starting to pick up. No one's going to watch anything about a mom and a
mm,
baby. Like I think Bethany maybe got pregnant or something, but no. And to your point too, the stories, like my oldest did not sleep the first 5 years of his life.
mhm.
Like no one wanted to hear that.
No.
Where am I going to go to find somebody that relates to that? It's not the
Yeah.
mommy and me groups, because no one's going to talk about that, because God
Mhm,
forbid we air our dirty laundry that we
mhm.
did it wrong.
Yeah, no, and that's exactly it though. That's like talking to the things that you struggled
Mhm.
with. That's, I think, our role um as those who have been through it and know it is
Yeah.
speaking to the hard stuff. And maybe it's not the same thing. Like for me, my girls both slept really well. But I remember having one of my close friends who would, it felt like to me, every time I talked to her, she would just be talking about her kids not sleeping. And I
Mhm.
didn't relate to that because mine did.
No. Yeah.
But to me, I was struggling with other things that I could
Yeah.
talk to her about. So she knew that even if I wasn't struggling with that, I was struggling
There
with
was
something
something
else.
else.
Mhm.
Yeah. There was
Um,
something else.
and that's why I love shows like Working Mums and what's the other one called? Working Mums. Uh, there's two shows on Netflix. Oh, The Letdown, I think it's called.
Yeah.
That are about kind of these mums who are just struggling their way through.
The one
Um,
I don't get, and season 2 just came out and it's really not worth it, was Sex Life.
oh, I haven't seen it.
Where it's I think Adam Damos is his name, and then I can't remember the girl's name, where basically like she has like an infant at home and then like a toddler, and then she goes off and runs into her like ex-boyfriend in the city, and she has all these fantasies about all this crazy sex they had. Spoiler alert, if you don't want to hear the end of season 2, I'm just going to blow it because it's really not worth watching, is she ends up back with him again. But I'm like, how
Mm,
are you going out to bars and you're lactating? Like, let's just be honest that you're like, no,
yeah, yeah, yeah. No, that doesn't sound
that's
realistic.
not relatable, honey.
No. I mean, there's so many things like that, like even
Yeah.
the like milking through your shirts constantly, like
Get
not
a pad,
wearing.
honey. Get a pad.
Yeah. Yes. That's where that Working Mums is the literal
Yes.
opposite, where they are almost exaggerating
Yeah.
the level of like struggle these women are going through. And I actually had on my podcast, I had the gift of interviewing Gina Rinaldi, who played Frankie in Working Mums.
Oh,
And
awesome.
she was just so fun. Like, but she was my favorite character on the show, just because she was the most kind of like didn't give a
Yeah,
crap. I loved her.
exactly. You're like, that's the person I needed
Yeah.
12 years ago.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So,
That's awesome.
I think we all have our role to play,
Yeah.
whatever our struggle is, talking about it, normalizing it.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, part of me thinks that we just have to kind of work through it, and also not being afraid to ask for help. That's something I've always been that person to carry
Yeah.
12 grocery bags. I've always been that person to carry 2 suitcases
Of
by myself
course.
up the escalator. Like, but you have to be prepared to say like, hey, I'm really struggling. Or like someone says, can I grab you lunch sometimes? And you're like, oh, thanks, I'll let you know if I do need that. But then
Just say
taking them
yes.
up on it, like,
Yeah.
so asking for help, which is
Yeah.
hard.
What's your, just out of curiosity, what's your go-to meal? What do you give new moms usually? Like what do you make usually?
Um, I actually don't typically tend to. I'm trying to think. Do I? I don't actually even tend to make new mums something. I tend to just give I tend to either like get them something like a banana bread from a local bakery or something.
Mhm.
I'm very much like, I love supporting local businesses. So
Oh, good for
something
you.
that I know they like my most recent friend, she loved this banana bread from this coffee shop. So I picked up a loaf of that, or some smoothies, or something that is more like a lunchy thing, because for me it wasn't dinner wasn't so much the problem,
Yeah.
because my husband would be home and my cooking was like my escape.
Ah,
um
okay.
but for lunchtime during the day, that was the time I was like, ugh. So I tend to just
Ah.
buy things that people
I
can
do
have
that
first.
mostly now. You have to be really like special to me for me to make something for you. But my cousin, my second cousin on my mom's side, who lives here locally, she brought me this big tray, and it's a family recipe apparently, of like this stroganoff. So it's like
Mm.
a beef in like a little bit of like gravy and it's all braised. And then you do like egg noodles. And she brought a bag of salad. And then she brought a pack of Guinness for milk. And I was like, and that's not even the Irish side of my family, which I think is hysterical. So this is the German Dutch side.
That's
so I was
funny.
like, all right, I don't know where this is coming from, but that has always stuck with me because it kind of hit all the food groups, including the Guinness.
Is Guinness something that she knew you drank?
No,
you?
if you actually, I learned this from the Guinness Factory Museum. Is Guinness, the darker beers supposedly are helpful for your milk supply, and it's lower on alcohol. So darker beers can actually, if you're having milk supply issues, kind of help build that up. Whether that's an old wives' tale or not, I have no idea. You know, to me, it's like chocolate milk, so whatever. But and it was good for my husband too. He was happy.
Yeah, I bet. Yeah, but that's also speaking to the fact of like it's okay to have a drink as well.
Right.
Like, it doesn't have to be like
you don't need to pump and dump and do the whole crazy thing or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. I have a couple questions that I have been asking some of our guests. So, what is your favorite activity since becoming a mom?
I don't know if you consider this an activity, but my favorite moment in the day, and this is nothing against my 5-year-old, but my 2-year-old is very, very, very snuggly, and so am I. And she loves to like put her face next to mine, like on cheeks to cheek, and like snuggle together. Like I put my arm over her, she puts her thumb in her mouth. And so lying there like that is like my happy place. So I don't know if that's an activity, but
it counts. I will tell you, my 12-year-old, he's like on the verge of, again, Dutch side of the family. We're hoping to overcome the Italian height deficit. He is like a carnival teddy bear right now and still likes to snuggle. So I hope you have that for as long as possible because it's wonderful.
I know. Yeah,
more to snuggle.
My favorite feeling. Yeah, and the soft skin, like yeah.
Yep. Yeah. All right. One piece of advice for new moms. What would that be?
Yeah, I would say that at some point the wheels are going to fall off. This is going to be hard, and you're going to wonder if you can do this, if you're made out for this. Remember that everyone goes through this, no matter what you see on social media, no matter how good things seem for everyone else, and you will get through it. Ask for help in that time if you need it, but it's okay for you to break down and need help.
Awesome. And then last one here, I'm gonna tweak what I wrote here. For you, what does it mean to you to be, I'm gonna say, a healthy, active mom in postpartum?
Listening to your body. Your body knows what it went through, and we've become really good at overriding what our body says to us. But the more you listen and trust it, even if that means you were supposed to have a hard workout on this day, and your body says no, and you're like, well, I gotta push through. That's what I'm supposed to do, right? Even if that means skipping that, maybe that next week you'll feel amazing and it will be back on track and you'll get back quicker. But that one day of pushing through could be enough to push you over the edge to end up injured or broken down in some way.
Yeah, no, that's great advice. Great advice. If you guys want to learn more about what Tina has put out on YouTube, you can find her at Tina MUIR 88 on Instagram. She's also the host of the Running for Real podcast. You can find her on YouTube. Tina, thank you so much for talking postpartum running, Red-S, all the good stuff, and sharing all that you're learning with the world about Red-S. And hopefully we can continue to raise awareness and make sure that this isn't an issue for postpartum moms as well. Thanks so much for being on.
Thank you so much for all the work that you do. It really is important. And this is a critical piece of making that step is exactly what you're doing here. So appreciate you.
Thank you.